The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
You send me stuff and I send you stuff. I get like reels of stuff. And so back in the fall, like 2025, last year, I got this reel out of Florida, I think. I knew I wanted to do some Dirty Badge episodes. I knew we were going to have a different kind of season premiere this year. And then I wanted to do a couple of those. And this reel just stuck in my head. And I don't know how to explain like how crazy it was. But, you know, do you ever just see things that you can't unsee sometimes?
Yeah, I see all kinds of things I can't unsee. Yes. In fact, I'm not so sure I ever unsee anything.
Well, so
This is one of those things. It's awful.
yeah. So I saw a couple of these like weird reels where it was basically cops doing stuff that I just could not wrap my head around. And one of those things this year involved a deputy named Timothy Poole. Did you see this whole thing?
I did.
Okay, so there are multiple things going on with this that are just wrong. But Timothy Poole, from what I can tell, is a Charlotte County deputy. At one point, the local news down there, including Wink News, which I didn't know what Wink News was. So if that's a terrible source, it's really only for this one thing. WINK. They did an investigative piece on this, so I wanted to like bring it up. Back October 24th, Maddie Heron and Brianna Lanham, they put up an article on the website there that is under Wink_investigations for Wink News. And it says the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office has concluded its investigation into a deputy-involved shooting and handed the case over to the state's attorney for review. Okay. They give us 2-sentence summary here, and then we're going to talk about this. It says, on September 23rd, Deputy Timothy Poole shot and killed 50-year-old Daniel Birch during a call for battery. The incident, captured on body camera video, escalated from a verbal dispute to gunfire. And then Deputy Poole retired. So this happens in September 2025. I hear about it in October. By the time I've heard about this, like this guy has retired. He's like, I'm done. I'm just going to bail. The video, if you guys have not seen this, I will put a link in the show notes to the body cam footage from this. And it's pretty short. Like the video itself is pretty short. But it essentially is a cop tasing a guy, and then very quickly after that, now it's going to pause in the one that I'm going to put up, but the same guy that he just tased, who is still not cooperating, I guess would be the word, with the police officer.
I'd say he's actually provoking him a little, but not with actual violence.
Right. He's just...
I don't want to smart ass.
Yeah. He's being really sarcastic and he's being a smart ass. He's being.
I don't know about you, but my thought was I could have this exact same reaction if I didn't know better.
Correct.
Because he's thinking to himself, why is this cop bothering me?
Right,
Like, he
right.
can't possibly be serious.
Yeah, he's super annoyed, and the cop is annoyed, and it pauses, and you hear the audio over top of it. The cop literally just gets tired of trying to tase the guy and shoots and kills him.
It is insane.
And so that results in there being a lawsuit. Obviously, as I said, Deputy Timothy Poole, who shot and killed 50-year-old Daniel Birch during this encounter, he has retired by the time I even hear about this. So essentially in October 2025. Now, the reason I bring up the wink thing is they like pull the full personnel file. And I have not seen that happen. Typically, when I go looking for a personnel file, a lot of times I end up having to get some kind of court order. You can't do the full thing through a FOIA, but they pull the whole thing. They talk about it in this really brief blurb from October. And it just says, during his 22-year career with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, Timothy Poole had 6 complaints filed against him, resulting in 8 allegations. Only 2 of these allegations were sustained. One of them is a traffic violation. The other is a failure to properly document a domestic dispute, and he got a written warning for that. According to Timothy Poole's attorney, Stephen Leskovich, he described his client's personnel file as unremarkable. The exact quote is, "His personnel file to me is unremarkable. There is nothing in there that I'm overly concerned about." Now, Timothy Poole's file includes his history of service in the Air Force. He also worked as a state correctional officer before joining the sheriff's office in 2003. And that he has multiple entries in his file about the Air Force and about being a correctional officer. He received numerous accolades and awards throughout his career. One notable commendation came a day after the fatal shooting when the Punta Gorda police chief thanked Timothy Poole and other deputies for their assistance with an arson investigation. Now, the attorney here, Stephen Leskovich, he goes on to say, you're talking about 3 decades of experience, and you've got to take your 3 decades of experience and utilize that in a matter of 1 second or 2 seconds. Now, Birch's brother, Jeff Birch, is quoted in this article. He says that Poole's past actions do not change the impact of the shooting on their family. What he did the day before, the day after, has no concern to my family. Our only concern is what he did to my brother. Now, at the time that you and I are recording this, we're like deep into our holiday stuff. You're editing, and we're putting those out for people. So we're releasing this a couple months after we record it. Now, at the time that we're doing all of that, there's no prosecution pending for Timothy Poole down in Florida, but it definitely does go viral. This video, when I first saw it, I think I saw it as a Facebook reel. And so I went back through and I pulled like an article earlier in the month from the Gulf Coast News Now.com. This is from a guy named Tyler Watkins down there. And the title of it is just Charlotte County Deputy Retires After Shooting That Killed Deep Creek Man. It says the Charlotte County deputy who shot and killed a man during a confrontation along Saxony Circle in Deep Creek has retired. The Charlotte County Sheriff's Office announced that Timothy Poole submitted his retirement notice, which went into effect on Thursday. On September 23rd, deputies were called out multiple times to the condo complex. At approximately 8:50 a.m., the CCSO responded to a criminal mischief call, possibly involving 50-year-old Daniel Scott Birch. Although Sheriff Bill Prummel said it was believed that Birch was responsible for some damage around his neighbor's property, there was no evidence at the time. Prummel said the responding deputy only documented the damage and left. Later on that day, the CCSO was called back to the complex by Birch's neighbor, who said that Birch had physically assaulted him at the Deep Creek Golf Club. Body camera footage that was released earlier this week showed Poole and Birch's confrontation, during which Timothy Poole shot Birch. Birch was taken to the hospital. He ends up dying on September 25th. According to the sheriff's office, Poole's retirement does not impact his investigation, and it would have continued regardless of this decision. Sheriff Prummel also said internal findings about the investigation are expected to be turned over to the state's attorney's office next week. So that's all back in September and October of 2025. This case is crazy. It is one of the most interesting examples of an officer just straight up murdering someone.
He absolutely straight up murders this guy. And at first, you sort of it wasn't like to be mean, but you like sort of blindsided me with it because it literally is a guy without a shirt on and it's body cam, right?
Yes, it is.
And I'm watching it. I'm like, what is this? And it got my attention really fast because I had to watch it again. And I'm like, did he just kill that dude? Because I did watch the version that I think it pauses, but I think like there's an explanation going on as well. Like we're pausing this so we're not showing this man actually getting killed.
Right.
Something to that effect.
Well, or they're not showing the shooting itself. He doesn't like get killed right there. It takes him 2 days to die.
Right. But like nothing else happens to him.
Correct.
The being shot by the police officer is what killed him.
Correct.
But yeah, he doesn't die right there on camera, but they don't even show like the actual exchange. But leading up to it, they show that. And I was so confused because I thought for certain that I had to have missed something.
Yeah.
And I didn't. I didn't miss anything. The deputy, I thought perhaps he had lost his mind temporarily. Now, you said something about I believe it was the deputy's attorney saying that there was nothing notable in the file.
The personnel file, yeah.
Okay, well, is the attorney the reason we have access to the file?
Yeah, it seems to be, yes.
Okay, that makes sense because it seems like he's presented it as a, look, this dude is completely fine, right? Like it's not an exemplary record, but it's a pretty clean record, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about what the victim's brother stated is, I agree with that. I agree that like nothing about anything else has anything to do with this. In fact, the only thing I thought when you were kind of reading through the record and how he had been with the office for 22 years or in law enforcement for that long or whatever it was, I thought, well, he should have known better. And then I also was thinking, is it just because, previously he didn't shoot somebody, but if he took this attitude with him to work every day, I can only imagine the kind of cop he was.
Well, it seems to be in that department because one of the things that happened, like while all this is going on, and when I first started researching this, I sort of get hung up on things and I have to like pull a bunch of information together and start sorting out what matters. Maddie Heron, so the same person writing for Wink Investigates about this incident, she has an October 31st, 2025 article that pops up, and it says Charlotte County family sues sheriff over deadly deputy shooting. So at first, I thought it was the same incident. It is not. It is a different shooting, but still the Charlotte County sheriff's deputies. So, but
not the same deputy, right? He had retired.
Well, no, this is prior to that. And I can't tell if the same deputy is involved or not. But Sheriff Bill Prummel is, again, defending his deputies. Here's what that one says. It says the family of Elroy Clark, a Charlotte County man shot and killed by deputies last year, filed a civil rights lawsuit in May against Sheriff Bill Prummel and 3 deputies. So this is all in 2025. The lawsuit accuses the sheriff and deputies of excessive force. Okay. The incident gained attention after body camera footage was released showing deputies interacting with Clark at his home after calling 911 to remove a trespasser. Deputies claim that Clark, so Elroy Clark, the guy who called 911, has an outstanding warrant. So when they attempt to arrest him, the situation escalates, and that results in Clark's death. And according to Michael Beckman, now this is a different attorney who represents the Clark family, he says, Mrs. Clark, she's now a widow with 4 children. Her reason for filing the lawsuit is not to get publicity. So Beckman, while he says that, he has released a couple of press releases. And in one of those press releases, he talks about Deputy Timothy Poole. And he says that these 2 cases share similarities. He claims that Deputy Poole's actions are comparable to those of the deputies involved in Clark's case. And to be clear, Timothy Poole is not named in the other case, but the same sheriff is in the same department. So according to court records, no Timothy Poole in the Clark family's lawsuit. But Beckman says it really upset Clark's family when they saw that another person had been shot on his own property, just like Elroy Clark was. And both of them, so he says, 1, it was on his own property, just like Elroy. 2, they were unarmed. Most importantly, the deputies in the shooting of Mr. Clark, they were briefly put on leave, and then they went back to work. The Charlotte County Sheriff's Office declined to comment on this particular lawsuit. And Stephen Leskovich, he says that the press release, so this is the guy that's Timothy Poole's attorney. He says the press release paints a false narrative about Mr. Poole. He said Mr. Poole had nothing to do with Mr. Clark's death. In October 2024, Sheriff Bill Prummel defended his deputies' actions in a press conference. He said they used every piece of tool they had in their non-lethal toolbox. Michael Beckman said he hopes a favorable decision for Clark's family will lead to changes within the sheriff's office. He said it'll give a peace of mind to the widow. This is according to Beckman. Hopefully it changes a lot of the practices that we've seen in training. So court records at this time show that a judge had granted a renewed motion to stay discovery. That had been filed on behalf of the CCSO, or the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. So the evidence gathering pauses while that goes on. They're all due back in court over the holiday season. There's a second kind of follow-up to this, but this actually comes out of mysuncoast.com, that's ABC7 down in Florida. And this one says, the byline is from Jim Dela. It says the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office has asked a federal court to dismiss a wrongful death suit filed by the family of a man shot to death by deputies in 2024. The motion filed on behalf of the Sheriff's Office contends that the 3 deputies involved in Sheriff Bill Prummel are entitled to qualified immunity. Qualified immunity protects law enforcement and other government officials from lawsuits in the course of their duties unless a plaintiff can show they violated a clearly established statutory or constitutional right. The civil suit filed in May by the family of 42-year-old Clark, so they're back, they call him Leroy here, they call him Elroy in the other article. It contends the deputies involved were not properly trained and unnecessarily escalated the situation and used deadly force against Clark. So he asked the question, was the shooting justified? And says on October 23rd, 2024, deputies responded to a 911 call about a disturbance between 2 men in Punta Gorda. The sheriff's offices, once they arrived, deputies Brad Stender and Mitchell Palmer encountered 42-year-old Elroy Clark, so we're back to Elroy here, who wanted another man named Troy Johnson to leave his property. During their investigation, the deputies discovered that a warrant had been issued for Clark's arrest on an unrelated trespass charge. So they call in additional deputies. Specifically, Brad Stender calls for an additional deputy to assist them, and they attempt to take Elroy Clark into custody. At this point, the sheriff's office and the family disagree on exactly what happened next. The deputies say that Clark had been acting erratically, identifying himself to the 911 operator as, quote unquote, the King, K-I-N-G. So Deputy Stender grabbed Elroy Clark's left wrist in an attempt to place him in handcuffs. Elroy Clark resisted and refused to obey orders. This is all according to the sheriff's take on this. Clark continued to resist, and 2 deputies fired tasers and used pepper spray multiple times, all of which then failed to subdue Elroy Clark. So a 3rd deputy, Alexander Magoon, arrives to assist. By now, deputies have actively been fighting with Mr. Clark for 10 minutes. They've used multiple verbal commands, attempted cuffing him, have deployed the taser 4 times, deployed OC spray twice. They've used the baton. They have tackled him, all of which were ineffective in gaining compliance. Okay, this is according to the motion that the sheriff's office writes. But I got to tell you, if you did that much stuff and you didn't get this guy under control, you need a different career. Maybe checking the cards at Costco to make sure people are members. So after 3 rounds from a 12-gauge shotgun were loaded with non-lethal beanbags, and they failed to have any effect on Clark, Clark began to charge at Deputy Cinder and Deputy Magoon. Magoon draws his handgun and begins firing at Clark. Clark continues to advance toward the deputy. When Deputy Cinder fires 1 round from his service weapon and Clark falls, he then dies at the scene. Now, what the family puts out, according to this article, is very different. In their civil suit, they contend that Elroy Clark was having a mental health crisis. He was not a threat to anyone that day. And it says, quote, during the incident, Elroy Clark, who was in obvious mental distress, never acted aggressively toward the deputies and posed no threat, end quote. It also mentions a little further down, despite that, the deputies sprayed, tased, attacked, and physically beat Elroy Clark. The suit alleges that deputies used lethal force because Elroy Clark is an African-American of Jamaican descent, and Elroy Clark would not have been engaged with lethal force but for the fact that he is a member of this protected class. The suit also contends that Clark was shot by Deputy Cinder after he had fallen to the ground, and when this shot occurred, according to this lawsuit, Clark clearly is not a danger to any person. He had been injured from other gunshots. He is on the ground, not making any movements toward the deputies or any member of the public. I got to say, if that's true and he's on the ground, and these are 2 different sides to a story here that are going to play out in court, that is awful if these cops shot him when he was on the ground.
Well, there's body cameras. They're not.
There is body cam footage of this. I don't have a clear answer on that, the way they're cutting it and releasing it. The family also accuses the sheriff's office of having a history of excessive force. They say the CCSO intentionally fails to investigate its officers' use of excessive force against civilians or hold deputies accountable for such misconduct. As a result, CCSO officials come to believe they can harm civilians with impunity. Sheriff Bill Prummel is also named in the suit, saying he failed to properly train the deputies and discipline them for misconduct, perpetuating a culture of violence within the sheriff's office. The civil suit is seeking compensatory and punitive damages. The civil case is on hold until a judge rules on this sheriff's office motion to dismiss. The sheriff has basically said they can't sue us, which is pretty standard for those of you who don't know. And I'll probably include a link below so you guys can see the motion to dismiss and the original complaint.
Right. And so now I just want to make sure I understand this. Elroy Clark calls 911 and says that King Troy Johnson, I don't think he actually called him that, but somebody who's clearly having an issue needs to leave his property, right?
Right.
And so Elroy Clark is at home. Is that right?
Yeah, he calls himself the king.
Elroy Clark calls himself the king?
Yeah, he says, this is the king, like the king of my castle.
Oh, I guess
in the 911 call. Yeah, no, it's confusing. It's not you. This is confusing, the way that Suncoast put this out there. But it's the only one that had this detail. But the family is reiterating it to this reporter, and they're reiterating on the lawsuit from the perspective that shows he was having some kind of crisis.
Okay.
I think he has a heavy accent too.
Okay. And so, okay, but he calls them out there because somebody else
is trespassing.
And it's legit, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I don't know the ins and outs of what occurred, except that an emergency situation, I don't know if this was actually an emergency or not, but if he was on his own property and there was somebody there that he didn't want to be there any longer, that it is the police officer's job to remove the person or to tell them they can't come back, right?
Correct.
And I realize that law enforcement takes every single opportunity that they have to run every single person's information to check for warrants. But I feel like that was entirely inappropriate here.
This is so. The bottom line is this for me. I get so angry about cases like this. If you're on someone else's property and they are unarmed and you shoot and kill them, you have committed murder. No matter who you are, no matter what you thought you were doing, no matter who excuses you.
Well, right. And so, from what I can see, he had a misdemeanor failure to he had a failure to appear on a misdemeanor trespassing charge. That's
correct.
That's
a nonviolent misdemeanor trespassing charge. Correct.
Okay. And a lot of times, I don't know that it's the case here. A lot of times people have no idea that they have a failure to appear. A lot of times people appear or their attorney appeared and there's no reason a failure to appear should be there.
That is correct, yes.
It does seem like he was trying to divert attention away from the fact that he was Elroy Clark. I can't tell if they actually took care of the trespassing problem first.
I do not believe they did. He tells one of the deputies that his name is Ben Day. Bendey. Something is going on with this guy where I don't know if he's high or if he's really having a mental health episode, just like the family describes. But the bottom line is, he's on his property. He's asked the police for help. These situations should never result in the person who calls 911 being shot and killed if you have even remotely competent officers.
Right. And so I guess my thought on this is they found he had a warrant. They wanted to arrest him. He disagreed. Beyond that, why did they shoot him?
Ultimately, the shooting by both sides is acknowledged to have started with Alexander Mangoon, the deputy who is called to the scene, pulling out a firearm during the middle of a attempt at a non-lethal de-escalation. He pulls out the firearm. He fires.
Well, that's not non-lethal.
No. There is a non-lethal de-escalation happening. He drives up on it and he pulls out a firearm. That's where the problem happens. And both sides agree to that.
Okay.
But they're saying he was within his job duties protecting the other two deputies Palmer and Deputy Cinder, who were not they were not in the right shape to take down Elroy Clark.
Okay. So you don't take him down.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you shoot him.
Probably the minute that you say to him, you know what, we're not going to arrest you. We are, however, going to issue you that ticket again today.
So you have to go to court. And
you need to show up in court for this misdemeanor or infraction trespassing charge that you have. That's what they needed to do because the minute they threatened to arrest him, they're escalating the situation.
Well, right. And if it had been for first degree murder or something, that's one thing. Maybe I'm wrong in that perception, but he literally just wanted somebody to leave his property. And
you killed him.
That is wrong.
Yes, it is.
It is so incredibly wrong. And I'm not sure, this happens, I believe, October of 2024. Is that right?
Correct. As opposed to September of 2025 when they killed the other person who was unarmed on his property.
Okay. And so this is becoming alarming.
It is alarming. Yep.
And so I see why Elroy Clark's family was horrified when it happened again. I'm not sure what part of law enforcement and specifically in Charlotte County, I'm not sure where it's gone awry. However, I also know that this could be true anywhere.
Correct.
And I don't know what the disconnect is, but it's almost like these deputies think that when they encounter a citizen, like they can shoot them. And that's
We have
mind-blowing to
created
me.
this environment for police where we have sort of an odd dichotomy happening. One is smart people are rarely police anymore.
Because they're smart.
Right. I'm saying that because it's happened more and more, to the point that, like, I sat starting during the pandemic, technically parts of 2020 and then parts of 2021, through recruitment efforts for 2 local jurisdictions as they were attempting to keep their police force together. They were losing their best officers, like from a financial perspective. And they thought throwing more money at those roles would keep those type officers. But the truth was that there were a number of frustrating things happening. Nothing to this level where you've got 2 fatal shootings by Charlotte County Sheriff's officers on unarmed people on their own property within, essentially a year of each other. Nothing like that. But the truth was that, like, we're entering a new age. And I made a comment that there's not a lot of smart police left, because a lot of the people who were smart and were involved in law enforcement move on fairly quickly. So that's part of the dichotomy. And that's not to say, like, I have seen so many dishonest police in the last year. Like, if I had not seen it with my own eyes, and I'm not trying to convince anybody of this is just my opinion. If I had not seen it with my own eyes, things as simple as $200 disappearing from a wallet on camera. You never see that $200 again. You have no idea what happened to it, except you do. I saw multiple traffic stops where body cameras were cut off at key moments, and then suddenly drugs were discovered. And having gone and interviewed those officers for other reasons and realizing that, like, it was happening right in front of me, it shaped my opinion of this. And I've dealt with probably 12 jurisdictions in the last year where multiple officers were doing things like this. And I am shocked by it, but I'm not going to get on a soapbox and try and convince other people. I'm just telling you where my opinion is coming from. So when I see something like this, and that is the first part of the dichotomy, we then have this other part of the dichotomy where, similar to the efforts during the pandemic to keep police officers on the force and, like, throw more money at the situation, we have given police officers a wide latitude under qualified immunity to, quote unquote, do their jobs, when the time they needed that latitude has passed. The world has changed, particularly with the new generation of kids who barely leave their house. The way that police interact with the public has changed. The way that people are arrested has changed. I have seen less and less violent arrest of people who have never had contact with the police before. It still happens, but it's, like, kind of minimal. There are still crimes happening. A lot of crime is actually down right now. But police get more and more protections, and more money is thrown at those roles. And citizens, just in the current state of the world, have a very high hurdle to surmount in order to hold police accountable for horrible behavior. And I have to say that killing 2 unarmed people on their own property within a year of each other means that, like, as sheriff, 1, you should probably resign. 2, if you don't resign and you're insistent upon, like, keeping that role, because he's been in this role for 13, 14 years at this point. He's worked for this department since 1992, according to his bio online. You have to consider if you need to make an example of one of your officers who is doing this. And I know he's going to say, oh, we turned it over to the state's attorney's office. But that's the weird thing that happens with qualified immunity as well. Cops already have the protection of very rarely being prosecuted for their actions by any type of local attorney because of a conflict, or by a state's attorney who's disconnected from the situation. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. However, I would have absolutely no trouble prosecuting any law enforcement officer who had committed murder. And
both of these cops committed murder.
They absolutely did. I can't even believe that they're trying to present it as anything else. In fact, I would say that it is not an officer's duty to ever shoot an unarmed person on their own property, regardless of how irritated they are at the person or how much what they're saying bothers them.
Yeah, and I have trouble with this because my personal experiences with cops have gotten worse. Like I don't have run-ins with them anymore. I like the run-ins I have are professional now. But that doesn't make them good. When I do not like having to confront somebody about something that's on camera, because it's no longer our opinions. It's video. It's happening.
Exactly. And everything's on camera now.
Yeah, everything is now on camera, including, like, that's one of the things that makes this particular behavior so shocking is we have these two guys on their own property, ultimately involved in what appear to be attempts at misdemeanor detentions. Okay. Because
I don't even know that that's what was happening in the case we started with.
Well, so they've had property damage earlier in the day that's thought to be a misdemeanor. We had this possible battery that's happened, which would be a misdemeanor. It's not assault and battery. It's just a battery. So my point in saying that, like, misdemeanor detentions is, like, cops are allowed to get involved at the point an accusation is made from the perspective of attempting to investigate. And ultimately, if you have a confrontational person, probably you need a supervisor on the scene. Like, so you step away from it, let it de-escalate a little bit. And I know people say, oh, that's not how it works. It is how it works in 2025. Because people really aren't trying to harm other people the way it has been in the past.
I don't see anything happening in that video that indicates that guy's trying to harm anyone.
Oh, he just wants away from the cop. He wants the cop to get out of his business. And he has some kind of dispute going on with a neighbor that's probably better handled in civil court.
And I feel like, I don't know, I'm really surprised to hear that man worked for the county that long as a sheriff's deputy.
So that was the deputy, and then the sheriff himself has also been there forever. He's been with the sheriff's office since 1992. He's been sheriff since 2012.
And I've seen somebody talking. I'm actually not sure who it was, but whomever it was gave me the impression that they were well aware of how awful this was, and that they were sort of skating around it, in that they were saying that, like, they didn't give the typical dog and pony show. They were like, this is not how this should have been handled.
Well, I think with the first shooting, you have a problem. With the second shooting, you have a pattern of problems.
Oh, absolutely. And I was going to say, you were saying, like, what needs to happen. Every single one of the Charlotte County Sheriff's deputies, they need to be trained on when they absolutely should not be using lethal force.
Right. And so I'm going to read this, and I'm going to poke a little fun in it, and then I'm going to explain how this all ends up in dirty badges. And, like, believe it or not, we're leading off with this as a part of a couple episodes. This is not the worst thing that's going on. This is just like where we started. But I have some commentary here. I pulled this up because I wanted to see what the sheriff's office put out there as the biography for the sheriff himself. And you're right. The sheriff has, like, come out and kind of talked both sides of the fence here. He defends actions through the attorneys. He doesn't have a lot to do with that. That's the attorneys like defending the town. But he ultimately refers Timothy Poole, who retires. Sheriff allows him to retire after 22 years of service, and rather than firing him, but he refers him over to the state's attorney's office for them to take a look at this. I don't know how that's going to go.
They should charge him.
He should be charged. And if, like, you and I may have to come back to this episode when we go to put it out and, like, actually address whether or not he's charged. I want to read the sheriff's bio for a second. It says, Sheriff Bill Prummel is a 26-year veteran in law enforcement who began his career with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office in 1992. He worked his way through the ranks and throughout most areas of the agency. He was elected as sheriff on August 14th, 2012, and assumed the office of sheriff January 8th, 2013. He ran for re-election in 2016, winning both the primary and general elections. Sheriff Prummel holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from St. Leo University in criminology with a minor in psychology, a master's degree in business administration from IMPAC University, and a master's degree in criminal justice from American Public University. In addition, he is a graduate of the Florida Sheriff's Institute, the National Sheriff's Institute, the 239th session of the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, the Law Enforcement Executive Development Seminar out of the University of Virginia, and Florida's Senior Leadership Program in Tallahassee, Florida. Sheriff Prummel was one of the founders of the Region 6 Intelligence Exchange for Southwest Florida. He's on the board of directors for CARE. He is the chair for Drug-Free Charlotte County, a member of the Florida Sheriff's Association serving on their legislative committee, and chairman of the board of directors for the Florida Sheriff's Youth Ranches. Sheriff Prummel was selected by the Florida Sheriff's Association as the state task force chair. In 2015, he was appointed by the governor to serve as a commissioner on the Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission and sits as a member of the Officer Discipline Penalty Guidelines Task Force. Despite all of this, Sheriff Prummel says his greatest accomplishments are his family. He is married to Tara, a kindergarten teacher. They have 2 sons and a daughter, Billy, Caitlin, and Andrew, along with Billy's wife, Marla, and grandson, Billy the 4th. Okay, just throwing this out here for a second. Probably shouldn't be doing all that other stuff. Probably should be just focusing on being the sheriff of Charlotte County and maybe training your deputies to the point that because there's some contradictions in here. It says he's a 26-year veteran in law enforcement. Okay. 25 years plus 8 years, meaning he's basically been, employed here for 25 years, it appears, plus 8 years is not 26. So obviously math is not the strong suit unless I'm missing something and he went to do something else. But it appears that he's been sheriff this whole time and he was a deputy before that. All these things that he is doing sound great. They are absolutely useless pieces of paper. I'm all for getting your degree, getting a master's degree. You definitely don't need all the extra stuff if you have 2 deputies, 32, 33 years into your career, shooting unarmed people on private property.
No, in fact, it brings all those, whatever they are, entities, programs, whatever, it brings all of them down to associate him with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I looked at this and I tried to have some kind of positive spin on all of this. But the bottom line is within a year, 2 people on private property. So this is not like a George Floyd situation where you've got somebody who's constantly interacting with law enforcement and he does something to get law enforcement's attention and he's trying to be detained and he's killed. You have 2, and honestly, there's not a race element to this either because one of these people that they shoot is black and the other one is white. So they're obviously equal opportunity murderers at the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. So when I look at this, the only thing I can think is you may put integrity, professionalism, and trust up as your little logo on your website, but you have failed your constituents and your public by at least 2 people by having your deputies like be able to murder them at their own house when they call your deputies for assistance because they think they can trust your deputies.
It's a disgrace.
Yeah, this is absolutely awful. So this is going to come back up. Do you have a lot more on Charlotte County right now? Because I want to tell you the rabbit hole I went down here.
No, go for it.
Whenever something like this happens, you and I use a number of sources. It used to be I could pull up any good news source and just kind of go with a couple of key facts and like build a stack of resources for you and I to go through. And that's where the stories come from that are on True Crime Access. Like you and I, probably 75% is like we're reading written words. A lot of that is court documents. We're big on finding newspaper articles or news articles, depending on, because today it's more news articles. It used to be, if it's an older case, it's probably more newspaper articles. And then figuring out where the facts came from. We both read tons of court records. And we've got all these new tools in this day and age where it used to be you'd have like the local sources. I frequently use Pacer and Justia, like Justia. I also use LexisNexis for work, so I have access to that. These are places that you can go and get like summaries of court cases to a degree, but it tells you where to go look. You can go and grab trial transcripts, you can grab motions, you can grab original complaints, you can get arrest warrants, and you can learn so much that the news never bothers to cover in 2025. You refer to it when you and I talk as like headline skimming. They like grab the most salacious bit or what they think is the most salacious bit, and they kind of turn it into the headline, and they put out what frequently amounts to like a puff piece.
Right, it's to grab attention.
Right. And in order to get to the real story, you go and you dig into it. So I start looking around whenever something like this pops up, and I just start looking for the names. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that like the person I started being the most interested here in terms of all of this when you and I were looking at this was Timothy Poole, Deputy Timothy Poole. And the rest of this episode and the next episode are not about the same Timothy Poole. I just will go down really deep rabbit holes sometimes simply based on a name. And I have this new source called VLEX that I'm able to like look through. It's powered by Clio. And I tested it here to see if I could find like why my brain was remembering the name Timothy Poole. Because I was like, I've heard that. So I found two cases. One was a case of a different Timothy Poole, and I'm going to tell that story today. And that's not so much a dirty badge case as it is a straight up interesting case that has some elements that you and I have talked about over the years. And then you'll see next week that like it gets a little crazy. But I was right. I had remembered the name Timothy Poole being associated with a murder before. So I had to narrow my search. I started as Deputy Timothy Poole, and then I went to Timothy Poole. And I came up with an old case, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that today on the heels of this like dirty badge thing, because this is a little different. This is a Maryland case from 1979. Do you remember me talking to you about a pharmacy shooting from a long time ago?
Yes.
So I had like this little like blurb about it. And what I'm pulling from today, I actually pulled from VLEX, but it is a Court of Appeals ruling in Maryland. It's an important one. There are a lot of attorneys involved here, so I'm just going to use the top level attorneys. So we have Deborah Handel and Stephen Capelease. They are the assistant attorneys general for Baltimore at the time this all is going down. And then George Burns Jr., he is the assistant appellate public defender in Baltimore. The actual document is called Timothy Poole versus the state of Maryland, and it's from the Court of Appeals in Maryland. And it is given to the public April 21st of 1981. They are arguing over some bits, but I'm going to tell you guys the statement of facts because I think it's an interesting case. It says that David Creel is 18 years old. He's working at McLarty's Pharmacy on the evening of October 22nd of 1979. According to statements, about 8 o'clock that evening, two African-American men come into the store. One pulls a mask over his head as he walks down steps to the back room where Dr. David McLarty, so McLarty's Pharmacy, and this is going to be the pharmacist, Dr. David McLarty, is preparing prescriptions. The other person, and according to the statements that we have from witnesses and the statement of facts and this long court case, that person is identified as Timothy Poole. Obviously not anything to do with the case in Florida we're talking about. But that Timothy Poole walks up to David Creel, who's behind the counter, and he points a shotgun at him. So this man that he's able to identify is not wearing a mask. He tells David Creel to go and lock the front door. So David Creel walks to the front of the pharmacy and he locks the door, and the gunman is behind him the whole time, and he's holding onto his belt, like the belt of his pants. But he's got the shotgun leveled at the back of David Creel's head. So after the man watches David close and lock the front door, David hears two gunshots in the back room. Dr. McLarty says, "Is there anyone else out there?" The gunman orders David Creel to say no. So he whispers to him, tell him no. And then he forces David Creel to walk ahead of him into the back room where they find the other gentleman who had come in and pulled his mask down, a guy named Stephen Horrod. He is lying on the floor of the pharmacy. He's breathing hard and he has a head wound. So Dr. McLarty, David McLarty, he is standing by the safe of the pharmacy. So David Creel basically steps out, and the person who has the shotgun at his back steps past David Creel, and he shoots Dr. McLarty in the chest with a shotgun. So McLarty falls to the floor, and he's having trouble breathing. But whoever this is, we believe it's Timothy Poole, he orders David to get the money. So the assailant then picks up a gun off of the floor that's lying beside Dr. McLarty, and he points it at McLarty's head. And David Creel says to him, "You don't have to do that." The man has the gun like an inch away from Dr. McLarty's face, and he double taps the trigger. David Creel hands over what is thought to have been $150 to the man with the shotgun, and he leaves. So Stephen Horrod, the masked man, he dies. And David McLarty, he also is going to die from his wounds. One of the men that they use in the statement of facts to talk about this case is a guy named Mark Blob. So Mark Blob recalls that about the time this shooting occurred, he and some friends were sitting on a curb not far from McLarty's Pharmacy, and they saw three black men drive by in a late 60s silver Cadillac that had a black vinyl roof. So Mark Blob remembers this because the men in the car were, quote, looking at us. They were looking at us real hard. So that's his quote about like why he remembers their faces. On October 25th, 1979, Mark Blob participates in a photograph array. He selects two photographs of people that look similar to the men that had been in this Cadillac. So he selects the photo of a man named David Brown. He identifies one of the men as sitting in the back seat, and he believes this is Stephen Horrod. And he also identifies who he believes is Timothy Poole. So in Stephen's pocket, so the guy that dies that has the ski mask on, they find little address books, which I don't think people are familiar with that anymore. But finding an address book in 1979 in the pocket of someone like involved in a murder, that's the equivalent of finding their phone today, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, the information is going to be relevant.
Yeah. So in one of these little address books, there's 100 or so listings. And one of those listings is Poole, Poole, and it has 2 telephone numbers. So because of that, police go to speak to Timothy Poole. When he's told about this, basically in the days after, he shows no reaction to the police. He says that he's not seen Stephen Horrod since the afternoon, the day of the shooting. He also says that at the time of the shooting, he was with his girlfriend and her roommate, and that they were at 3H, so apartment 3, so building 3, apartment H at Neptune Court in Baltimore County. Police do a deep dive investigation into Timothy Poole, and they're able to see that he was signed out of his residence from the, quote, Dismas house on a 6-hour pass, and that he was headed to 3H Neptune Court. So the girlfriend alibi and her roommate, their names are Jennifer Lanier, that's the girlfriend, and Tamara White. So they live at 3H Neptune Court. When the police go and talk to them about where Timothy Poole was on the evening of the shooting, they say he was not with us. So Jennifer Lanier says to the detectives that sometimes Timothy Poole would use her address as a quote unquote sign out, but would go other places. And to their other questions, she says she never recalled seeing Timothy Poole driving a car. But Tamara White said she remembered there was a time that she saw Timothy Poole operating a large dark gray car, but she didn't remember the make, the model, or the year. So the prosecution has presented their case, and the defense comes up, and they bring a woman named Yvonne Bethea, and she testifies for the defense. She states that on the evening of the shooting, Timothy Poole was actually at her residence at 1604 East Monument Street. Everyone kind of agrees this is about a 10-minute walk from the Dismas house. And Yvonne says that Timothy was helping her with schoolwork that she had been having some difficulty with. To his credit, at the time this all occurs, Timothy Poole is a student at Morgan State University. Now, obviously, by the time we see this, the reason that there's an appeal is there's been a conviction. So Timothy Poole has been convicted of being involved in the murder of David McLarty. And what they've done here is they've convicted him of premeditated murder, also felony murder. So that's technically the felony murder that they put on him is both ways. It's actually also encompassing the death of Stephen Horrod at the time. They have convicted him of robbery with a dangerous weapon and the aggravating factor, special enhancement, and additional charge of the use of a handgun in a crime of violence. So that's in the circuit court over in Calvert County, Maryland, that a jury has convicted him. This same jury sentences him to death. In addition to the death penalty, he, on the other charges, is sentenced to life imprisonment, 20 years to run concurrent, and 15 years to run consecutive. So because Timothy Poole is convicted on this statement of facts that I just put out there and sentenced to die, all of his convictions and sentences under Maryland code, and I think it's now under the U.S. code as well, they are all directly reviewable by the Court of Appeals in Maryland and the corresponding district because they involve the death penalty. That is not true in every single conviction. That is usually true in most jurisdictions in a capital case. Would you agree with all those statements I just made?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So,
It's possible I'm wrong, but I agree with you.
okay. So when we get to the point this is up for appeal, Timothy Poole raises 8 issues. Now, we're going to talk about them, but we get to a point where the court agrees with him. So he contends that the trial court committed a reversible error in allowing the state within in its case proper to impeach its own witness, thereby prejudicing his defense and depriving him of a fair trial. He maintains that the trial court permitted the state to violate the so-called witness voucher rule. I'm going to explain a little bit of that. So according to this appellate document, it says there exists in this state, meaning Maryland, the general rule that a party who produces a witness in court vouches for that witness's credibility and trustworthiness, and no direct attack upon that veracity should be made by the producing partner in the absence of surprise, hostility, or deceit. So essentially, if you put on a witness, you are saying that what the witness is going to say, as far as you know, is the truth.
Well, it's not just the truth. It also backs up your position in the case.
Right. Yeah, that's a better way to phrase it. So you shouldn't be putting on extraneous witnesses anyways, but you're correct. Like, you bringing the witness as a party to the facts of the case, and you believe them to be true.
Correct. And unless it's by surprise, or I can't remember what else you said, it's going to follow a certain narrative that has been mostly decided in like pretrial issues, right?
Yeah, it's surprise, hostility, and deceit. So essentially, surprise would basically be the witness says something that you didn't think of asking them. Hostility means that the witness is called sort of against their own interests, and when they get on the stand, say something that, like, not only did you not expect it, but it's like contrary because they're saying they don't want to be a part of this to some degree. It can be misread as anger, or deceit, meaning they have lied to you, and now for whatever reason,
they decide to tell the truth on the stand.
They either decide to tell the truth on the stand, or the defense is able to cross-examine them in such a way that, like, you have to go along with it in order to rehabilitate the witness.
Right. And this is just, it actually sounds a little confusing, but it's pretty much straightforward.
Law School 101.
With regard to the adversarial procedure of criminal justice, you don't ever want to have somebody on the stand that you don't know the answer to the questions you're asking them.
Right.
And you don't want it to undermine any position you are trying to put forth.
Right. And in these appellate documents, they outline a number of precedent cases where the rules for how you can impeach a witness are laid out. And you have to meet all these different requirements that federal courts, and in this instance, the Maryland, like, appellate courts and Supreme Court have, like, they've decided this is how you interpret the different parts of this statute in order to get to the point that in this adversarial system, you know how to handle things that happen when you bring up a witness. So in this case, they have the following factual setting as how they're saying the state impeached the credibility of their own witness. And it says that the state established that on October 22nd, 1979, Timothy Poole signed out of Dismas House, the halfway correctional facility where he resided, and he gave Jennifer Lanier's address as his destination. That's the 3H Neptune Court. So the state produces Detective March. Detective March testifies that Timothy Poole told him he was with Jennifer Lanier and Tamara White at their house on the night of the shooting. However, when White got on the stand, she testified that Timothy Poole had not been there. Jennifer Lanier, the state's final witness, also testified that Timothy Poole was not there the night that the shooting occurred. So Timothy Poole is contending that at trial, it was common practice for him to sign out for Lanier's house, when in fact his destination was elsewhere. And we have a state's witness here, Jennifer Lanier, admitting that. So when they're confronted by police the morning after the shooting, it may have been natural for him to say that he was at her house so that his story would be consistent with what's on paper. Not just for the police, but also for like the people in charge of him at this halfway house, Dismas house, because he can go back to prison if he's found to be in violation of his release. So Poole's alibi was not that he had been with Jennifer Lanier the night of the shootings, but rather that he had been with Yvonne Bethea. And that's his entire defense rests on her. That's the only, aside from the cross-examination they do of the state's witnesses, the only defense witness that's presented is Yvonne Bethea. And according to her, Yvonne says, he was at my house helping me with homework. So we get this series in here, which is not every appellate document, but sometimes we do. We get a transcript of a series of questions that are asked. And it says, it's with this backdrop that we analyze the impact of the prosecution's examination of Jennifer Lanier, the state's final witness. And I love when they do this because it's interesting to see why they make the decisions they make. So the question asked is, what was your conversation with Timothy Poole the morning of October 23rd, 1979? Jennifer Lanier answers, well, we just talked. So the state's attorney says, talked about what? And Jennifer Lanier answers, school and people. The state's attorney tries to talk a little more about it and says, did you have a conversation concerning his whereabouts on the day prior, October 22nd, 1979? And Jennifer says, no. So the state asks, have you ever indicated to anyone that you had that conversation concerning his whereabouts? And Jennifer says, yes. And so at this point, the state's attorney says, what was that? Any conversation that you indicated? At this point, the defense objects. The court overrules the objection and basically says, go ahead. The state's attorney says, continue, please. And Jennifer Lanier says, I had told the officer that he had told me to say he was there the night before. And the state's attorney tries to get out the question, did you tell? The court basically stops everything and says, just a minute, and reaches over to the court reporter and says, would you read the answer back, please, Mrs. Bates? I don't believe the jury heard it. The reporter says, I told the officer that he had told me to say he was there the night before. And at this point, the attorney's asked to approach. So the court has them come up. There's a conference at the bench, or a bench conference being held, and the defendant is present. The jury is taken out, and here are the proceedings that are recorded by the court reporter. Mr. Carden says, Your Honor, it would appear to me that the state at this point is trying to impeach his own witness. If that's what it's doing, I think it's incumbent upon the state to proffer it to the court that it is caught by surprise by the witness's testimony. Otherwise, I don't think it's proper for the state to impeach its own witness. So Mr. Carden is Timothy Poole's attorney. And then Mr. Anders responds, he's the state's attorney. He says, well, the state's in the position where this witness has given several stories concerning what has occurred, and I'm really calling her to explain which is true and why. I don't know that I'm attempting to impeach her here. I'm not claiming surprise because whereas Mr. Carden has heard the stories that she's told, she's a necessary witness, and I'm calling her to explain what occurred and what she said before and why. The court says, well, it seems to me in this case that although you may have had more than one story, and Mr. Carden objected, you didn't have any choice but to ask the question. And then having asked it, you now have the matter which is inconsistent, apparently, with the first statement given. I really don't think this amounts to anything other than to demonstrate to the court that she's trying to help the defendant if she could. State's attorney says, beg your pardon. And the court says, I said I think it's pretty obvious to the court that the witness is in a tough spot. And it's certainly obvious to the jury that she's in a tough spot. She is apparently trying to help the defendant if she can. It's only natural, since they're boyfriend, girlfriend. To that extent, I think you have demonstrated to the court that you did have knowledge of another statement, and she has said that she made other statements. I sustained the objection that Mr. Carden made when I thought he was right, and I overruled it when I thought he was wrong. I don't think you're impeaching your witness by bringing out more than one story, which everybody already knows. So the bench conference is concluded. Everybody goes back, and the proceedings continue for a few more questions. And the state's attorney says, Jennifer, to clear this up, you indicated that you told the police originally that Timothy had come over to your house and asked you to tell the police he was at your house the night before. Is that right? And she says, yes, sir. State's attorney says, he was not at your house before. And she says, no. And your testimony today is that you had a general conversation concerning what on October 23rd when he came over to your house. And she says, school mostly, because I wasn't going to school that day. So the court ends up agreeing with Timothy Poole. That's the appellate court here. Do you think what she's doing there counts as impeaching her own statement, or is she just trying to get out that, like, she said a bunch of different things about that evening?
If I'm going to be completely honest, I feel like they're just going around in circles.
They are. They really are.
And I feel like this is like a textbook example of like a crazy technicality.
Yep. And it's a death penalty case, though, so crazy technicalities count.
Well, I think it should count. It's sort of, it's interesting. This is actually really interesting. And I do see exactly why they put the dialogue in the explanation of their opinion, right?
Right. And so they go with, the appellate court has a different opinion than the trial court did here. They say, we agree with Poole that when the state elicited Jennifer's prior statement, after her sworn testimony, she had never conversed with Timothy Poole about his whereabouts on the day of the shootings, that this would constitute impeachment. And it is very technical, and reading it back is probably very different than how it went down in court. It's also apparent from this dialogue that the state was not surprised by Jennifer Lanier's sworn testimony. In fact, surprise was expressly disclaimed. Equally clear is the basis for our conclusion that Jennifer Lanier's in-court testimony was not prejudicial to the state's case. Jennifer Lanier's no, meaning that she had not conversed with Poole about his whereabouts, was simply not beneficial. The state had established all the elements of its case. Lanier's no did nothing to advance or hinder it. In short, two of the prerequisites for invoking the exception to the voucher rule were missing. So the things that they have to do to vouch here, like, they're not allowed to impeach her. So nevertheless, the state contends that Timothy Poole's statement to Jennifer Lanier constituted as an omission by conduct, and as such is not excludable as hearsay, but is independently admissible as substantive evidence. What the state overlooks that it's not Poole's statement in which we're concerned here. It is Lanier's prior out-of-court statement which is at issue. Thus, even if Jennifer Lanier had been properly examined on direct, her prior unsworn statement would not have been admissible to prove the existence of Poole's statement, which was contained herein. So they go on for a minute here. They rule on this using a couple of other precedents. And they ultimately decide that ruling in Poole's favor here, here's how they say it. I'm going to give you the two paragraphs. The state's rejoinder is that in any event, Jennifer Lanier's statement that Timothy Poole had told her to say he had been in her house was harmless, as merely cumulative to all the other evidence which tended to show that Timothy Poole was not with Jennifer Lanier on the night of the shootings. We disagree. This statement is more than just cumulative to Tamara White and Jennifer Lanier's testimony. It cuts far deeper. This evidence permitted the jury to infer not only that Timothy Poole was not at Jennifer Lanier's house, but also that he had done something that night, the fact of which he wanted to hide and for which he needed to invent an alibi. It permitted the jury to infer that Timothy Poole had no innocent explanation for his whereabouts, that he had gotten himself involved with some kind of serious trouble. It is also apparent to us that Jennifer Lanier's prior statement cast a shadow over the credibility of Yvonne Bethea. If the jury believed Timothy Poole attempted to persuade Jennifer Lanier to lie, might they not also conclude that Yvonne Bethea's testimony was perjured. Without Jennifer Lanier's prior statement that Timothy Poole had at least the opportunity to present to the jury a defense untainted by the suggestion that he had a propensity to tamper with witnesses. We find that the omission of Jennifer Lanier's statement was fraught with prejudice. Because of this error, the judgments must be reversed and a new trial must be granted. Okay. Just because she says basically that little no at the end of her testimony, we end up having this entire capital murder case that has resulted in a very serious sentence, which is the death penalty in addition to life in prison, 20 years concurrent and 15 years consecutive, thrown out.
Right. And I think it might be helpful to sort of understand contextually what they were saying in those paragraphs was it matters because what she said mattered.
Correct.
And it's a pretty in-depth technical analysis.
Right.
However, it's not wrong.
Right. Yeah, so they split the baby on this. According to an article in the Washington Post, they end up reversing the death sentence, and then they order a new hearing because they do uphold the murder conviction based on all of this. If you go onto Case Mine, you can read a little bit more about this. But weirdly enough, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but weirdly enough, this is not like all of my digging into the name Timothy Poole revealed. And it wasn't what I was thinking of. It was just something I found so interesting that we could like essentially find ourselves sitting here on a capital case, and the word no is ultimately like what causes the death penalty to be kicked. That's pretty wild, right?
It is wild. And I find it also interesting. I'm pretty sure if the objection hadn't initially been made by defense counsel,
they would not have been able to touch it.
I don't think they could have brought it up on appeal.
Correct.
And so that is really fascinating. That is a defense attorney that's really thinking on their feet, right?
Yes.
Because how easily could that have passed everybody by?
I mean, it would have passed a lot of attorneys by. That's the nicest way I can think of to say it.
Because it's almost like an afterthought.
It is, yeah.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so what I think we'll do is we'll cut here, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this Timothy Poole, and that will segue into why this is all wrapped up in our Dirty Badges case.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabRottiCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.